So you want to go to a real party?
I want to make a 3-hour movie. It's a period costume drama. It's a movie about feelings.
Waste of money.
I don't really like sort of these gigantic, huge films.
Thanks for your opinion. Now I'm going to make it exciting.
I figured my career was over, but I was going to go down swinging. We were going to make the best possible movie we could.
If you are going to spend $200 million on a movie, this is the way to do it.
How do you even begin the story of making one of the biggest movies ever made? Oh, sure, you could open with Titanic itself, a glamorous White Star Line creation touted as unsinkable, only to prove everyone wrong. Or maybe with the film's massive Oscar sweep, with hijacked award season and turned it into a victory parade for the cast and crew. But we're not heading to the ocean depths or the Hollywood hills just yet. Instead, our voyage starts in a rather unexpected place, Spider-Man's friendly neighborhood. After Terminator 2 bulldozed the box office, Cameron took aim at a character he'd loved since 9th grade.
Spider-Man!
Not the breezy, quip-happy Saturday morning cartoon version, but a bold reimagining of a teenage hero grappling with real-world problems.
It's really about identity and values. And when you're 16, 17 years old, you're not accepting what you've been told. If you can do anything you want and nobody can stop you, you better have a pretty good value system or you better find one.
In Cameron's script, Peter Parker, cursed, discovered his budding powers through a grotesque metamorphosis. Think Kafka's metamorphosis. Not the glitzy kind of body swap you see in most superhero flicks, and had sex on top of the Brooklyn Bridge. It was gritty and absolutely unheard of for a comic book movie in the early 90s.
I think what Jim Cameron brings to the Spider-Man film is that finally Stan and the folks in Hollywood that work on these projects found somebody who had a great, tremendous love and history with the character.
In retrospect, Cameron was basically pitching the kind of dark, complex comic book adaptation Hollywood wouldn't fully embrace until Batman got all moody under Christopher Nolan's watch.
Nice.
Alas, the biggest villain wasn't an Electro-like menace or a mad scientist. It was a series of tangled lawsuits.
I want to do Spider-Man, but the rights are all messed up.
Messed up was an understatement. Kolo Pictures, those freewheeling producers who shoveled funds into T2, didn't exactly keep their financial ducks in a row. Initially, Kolo Pictures bought the rights to Spider-Man right after he wrapped T2. But when you invest millions in high-minded products that vanish at the box office and ignore the contracts you sign, not even a $500 million blockbuster can rescue your balance sheet.
And how does a company that has that kind of a hit go out of business?
It takes a really, really dedicated mismanagement.
Their last hope was a $50 million Spider-Man project. But instead of going into production, it ended up mired in a massive legal quagmire involving MGM, Columbia, and Viacom. The court rulings didn't go in Kolo's favor, and mounting losses drove the studio toward bankruptcy. In the end, Columbia Pictures emerged victorious. But by then, James had already moved on. Still, Cameron's sticky fingerprints lingered. Sam Raimi's later and notably more PG-13 Spider-Man featured organic web shooters, a concept Cameron championed first. The rest is cinematic what-if. Instead of teenage angst atop the Brooklyn Bridge, Cameron's next obsession lay 12,000 feet under the Atlantic. Let's rewind to September 2nd, 1985.
Good evening from CBS News. This is Newsbreak.
You might have been dozing off at the evening news, maybe something about Reagan's tax reform or the latest hurricane scare, but a wide-eyed James Cameron caught a broadcast that set his imagination ablaze. The long-lost wreck of the Titanic had been discovered on the Atlantic seabed.
Scientists who led the team that found the Titanic today released the cream of the crop of thousands of underwater photographs, among them haunting and poignant reminders of life on the great liner as it crossed the ice-cold Atlantic for the first and last time.
That scientist was Dr. Robert Ballard, whose name would soon become synonymous with deep-sea exploration. It turned out Dr. Ballard's original quest for Titanic had a secret prelude, one rooted in Cold War skullduggery. In the 1960s, the U.S. Navy lost 2 nuclear submarines. the Thresher, and the Scorpion under mysterious circumstances. By the 1980s, they needed someone to locate and investigate the wrecks and make sure the Soviets hadn't found them already. Ballard was tapped for the mission, and the official Search for Titanic story was quietly used as cover. Cameron's obsession didn't yet exist in full force, but the seeds were planted during a meeting with Ballard while Cameron was prepping The Abyss.
An American nuclear submarine, the USS Montana, with 156 men aboard, went down about 22 miles from here.
Damn.
Given the plot of the director's deep-sea action film, no wonder he was excited to meet Ballard.
As it turns out, Ballard found the missing subs and completed his mission so quickly that he still had 12 days left to search for Titanic. But I wasn't interested in Titanic. I was seeing about submersibles and remotely operated vehicles and these deep water robots that they're using. And he still had not sort of gotten over Titanic. He wanted to show me his tapes of how they discovered it and so on. And there was a little infection started. I had the germ, and I didn't know it. It was incubating, you know.
It incubated for over 5 years before finally the idea sparked.
I was just sitting around in between movies. I had done Terminator 2, looking for kind of what to do next. And I just happened upon a tape of A Night to Remember. And I hadn't seen it since I was a kid. And so I popped it in. I sat one afternoon and I just watched A Night to Remember. And the pieces just fell into place. And I thought, there's an opportunity here to tell a story with a present-day wraparound that's about exploration and the new technology, and it takes us back in time. But what's my hook? And then it popped into my head. It's a love story.
Almost as though the universe itself had given him a nudge. That nudge arrived in the form of an IMAX documentary premiere invitation, courtesy of his old pal and Abyss collaborator, Al Giddings.
Join us as some of the boldest deep-sea pioneers of the 20th century confront the challenge of placing two tiny 23-foot Russian submarines on the decks of Titanic.
And when I saw that, I realized that these scientific submersibles might be available to make a film, because they had done it for IMAX, which is a documentary, but I thought it's not that much of a greater leap to try to get these people involved in a fictional Hollywood movie.
The IMAX footage wowed him. Russian research vessels, mini submersibles, and images of Titanic's remains all lit up Cameron's greatest fascinations. Without missing a beat, he corralled Al Giddings and demanded an introduction to the Russian team.
He was my underwater DP on The Abyss, and he had introduced me to Robert Ballard and kind of put me down the path of meeting all the Titanic people involved, including the Russians. So I promptly flew to Moscow and met with the people that had done the IMAX film and said, hey, can I use your subs? And then once they agreed, then it was, now I'm making a film. I guess I better come up with a story.
But how do you pitch a movie like this?
I want to make a 3-hour movie.
Yeah.
It takes place in 1912. It's a period costume drama. It's a movie about feelings.
Right.
It's going to cost you $100 million plus, and there won't be any stars in it. What do you think, guys?
Hoping to find a hook to justify such a gamble, Cameron dove into Titanic research. One of his key sources was Titanic, an illustrated history. Ken Marshall's paintings in particular electrified his imagination. He also examined survivor testimonies.
We picked up the bits of ice, and most of us sprayed snowballs.
Gathered statistics, and studied how the ship was damaged. He marched into 20th Century Fox and flipped Ken Marshall's book open before Peter Chernin.
If you open that book up to the middle, there's a Titanic in the middle stages of its sinking, beautifully lit, lifeboats leaving, rockets going off, illuminating the night sky. And I put it in front of him and I said, Romeo and Juliet on that. And he stared at the painting for a little while. He said, yeah, let's do it.
Cameron asked for $80 million, $40 million less than the previous film, so they figured it would be manageable. The biggest shock came next. James asked for $4 million from the potential marketing budget to fund a deep-sea expedition.
I justified it by the fact that we didn't go there for research. Yeah. We went there to shoot part of the film. You know, I've joked many times over the years that I only made this movie because I wanted to go dive to the Titanic wreck.
Expedition preparations began well before anyone set foot on the open sea. Cameron recruited Dr. Anatoly Sigalovich, the mastermind behind the Mir submersibles, and assembled a team of Russian specialists from Kaliningrad.
And I would like to wish you the happiness and to all of us success in this
not so easy expedition. Thank you very much.
They rented the research vessel Academic Mstislav Keldysh, home to the Mir 1 and Mir 2, some of the most advanced subs in the world. To handle the crushing pressure nearly 12,000 feet below the surface, Cameron's brother Mike designed a special deep-sea camera capable of withstanding 400 atmospheres. A 1:33 scale model of the wreck was brought on board for rehearsals. On deck, they mounted a mini camera onto the miniature sub, complete with tiny fiber optic lights that matched what they'd used below. Russian sub pilots practiced maneuvering these toy subs so they could replicate the shots at a depth of 12,000 feet.
Well, it was a mission. It was a mission to go and shoot film in one of the most extreme environments that I think motion picture film has ever been shot in.
Over 28 days, Cameron made 12 dives down to the Titanic itself, discovering shockingly well-preserved sections of the bow, wooden paneled cabins, and piles of furniture swept aside by the current. Filming in near total darkness and sub-freezing waters brought unexpected emotions.
It's very black, freezing cold. It's as sterile and barren as the moon. It's almost like having gone to another planet. But yet here's this historical object there. So there's a surrealism almost to that. Oh, there's the first class entrance. There's the window to the captain's quarters. There's the davit for boat number 1. The human face of the drama is superimposable on what you're seeing through the viewport. And so you come away with it with an umbilical to the event that I don't think I would have had going through endless books and research. And we took the robot inside the ship and we looked around and you could see the ROV, the little orange robot that you see in the film. We actually took it inside. We didn't intend on doing that, but we did it. And you can see the ghostly grandeur still there. And no one had photographed that. So that was very exciting, but also emotionally overwhelming. And it's hard to exactly say what the emotional impact of that is, other than the fact that the film is the result of that.
Cameron considered the expedition more than just a spectacle. It was a moral obligation. After I saw the real Titanic wreck, he later said, I knew I couldn't cut corners. On their last night aboard, with everyone exhausted from the grueling 17-hour shoot, they gathered on the bow of the Keldysh and released a wreath upon the Atlantic. It read, "In memory of the passengers and crew of the Titanic," a gesture Cameron described as a cinematic wreath for those lost in 1912. Returning to Los Angeles with authentic footage in hand, Cameron assured 20th Century Fox he was ready to craft a full-length feature and started working on the screenplay.
I have set pieces that I want to see visually, and those kind of exist in a little pile, but not necessarily in any kind of order, and I don't know how to get there. And then I start working forward from character. What's their backstory? What do they care about? How do they meet? What's intriguing about each other? And so on. I write forward, and then I try to weave it through those bits of visual backdrop that I wanted to see. And it all, fell into place fairly well.
He dove into testimony, photos, and engineering analysis to reconstruct the ship's breakup more thoroughly than the classic Night to Remember had done.
I really felt that it was a mission and a responsibility to get it right. So we spent a lot of time on the kind of forensic analysis to kind of figure out what was happening during the flooding and the breakup of the ship.
By summer 1996, Cameron had a working draft of the script, but Fox's final approval required major adjustments. It was clear the original $80 million estimate wouldn't suffice. Cameron agreed to forego most of his upfront pay, recouping only if the film became a hit. With this arrangement in place, they approved a budget of $110 million, mandated a PG-13 rating, and planned for a summer 1997 release.
That's good.
As early as late 1995, James was already mapping out Titanic's most dramatic moments, long before any cast or location was officially locked. He and producer John Landau began piecing together the ship's destruction shot by shot, using miniatures and homemade video animations to visualize the breaking hull and plunging decks.
With the Videomatics, we could show the visual effects companies exactly how we wanted the sequence to play.
At the same time, Cameron and Landau scoured the globe for a place to build the colossal set. Malta, Sweden, Poland, the Caribbean, Australia, even a submarine factory in Southern California. Cameron considered them all, hoping to find a site that could handle the vast tank required for filming Titanic's epic sinking.
I wanted that beautiful lambent light that you get late in the day during magic hour in an English summer, that sort of thing, except I wanted it at sea. Well, how the hell are you going to do that?
He even toyed with constructing an upper section of the ship in Gdansk and sailing it around the Baltic under the glow of Ingmar Bergman-esque sunsets. But the logistics were daunting. Building an ocean tank on the far side of the globe made little sense. Instead, the search turned to Rosarito Beach, just 30 minutes south of the U.S. border in Mexico. Labor costs were cheaper, Los Angeles was within driving distance, and the sheer size of the location allowed for a massive backlot, the likes of which hadn't been seen since Hollywood's golden age.
We could build our sets down there, we could assemble them right across the border, we could bring our keys and our actors down from LA, it wouldn't require plane flights, we just drive. I could drive back and forth to my house in Malibu, which I did. It's kind of a crazy idea, but it worked beautifully.
Fox's plan to build permanent beachfront tanks and sound stages in Rosarito wasn't simply about creating a giant sandbox for one movie. It was also a long-term investment that might, they hoped, recoup at least some of the lavish spending. Cameron, meanwhile, had haunting memories of power plant struggles on the abyss. If building tanks from scratch spared him that headache again, well, that was a perk too. So in spring 1996, an army of workers descended on a seemingly unremarkable beach just south of Tijuana.
Welcome to the Baja Studios. It's with a special thrill that I'm able to say those words, since it was only a few months ago that this studio was nothing more than an idea.
Within 100 days, they built 5 sound stages, including the tallest sound stage in the world, the largest indoor filming tank, the largest outdoor tank, and entire neighborhoods for dressing rooms, offices, and craft workshops.
We actually were already greenlit and already officially making the film. When I was casting away, we were building like crazy. And then Fox wanted a partner to share the pain.
Yes, share the pain. Because the good folks at Fox suddenly realized money doesn't grow on palm trees. So they decided to recruit a buddy in the name of financial sanity, or at least plausible deniability.
Peter Chernin, he said, I want a partner on this. And I said, fine, you find the partner, I'll go start making the film, so we'll divide and conquer. So they brought in Paramount and...
for $65 million?
Yeah, Paramount was capped, and obviously they've been happy with that deal.
It was a great deal.
It turned out to be a great deal for them, yeah.
Meanwhile, Cameron still needed to find his perfect couple. He was determined that the film would be powered by chemistry rather than star power. The first quest, finding the unforgettable Rose. Cameron enlisted casting director Molly Finn, whose instincts had already delivered Edward Furlong in T2. At first, Finn's suggestion for Rose raised an eyebrow. Kate Winslet?
We almost didn't cast her. She had done so many period parts that it seemed kind of like lazy casting to me to cast Kate because, she was already known as Corset Kate. And, I wanted to have, in a sense, a more creative casting solution, but I just couldn't resist her. I just thought she was fabulous.
Her screen test was tragic yet tender, a perfect cocktail of vulnerability and inner strength.
Yes, Mr. Dawson.
Here at this screen test, she auditioned with Jeremy Sisto.
God, that thing.
The guy was one step away from becoming the Jack Dawson. Another pretty face who almost got the role was Matthew McConaughey. All right.
The audition went really well. Well enough where when I left, I was being glad-handed and slapped on the back like, this is what we were looking for. Well enough where you get outside, you call your agent and go, oh, I nailed it.
Yet Cameron wasn't satisfied. He needed a Jack who could embody the rebellious spirit of youth without turning into a walking action poster. While the studio pushed for big names like Pitt or Cruise, his search led him to Leonardo DiCaprio, a young actor who at first didn't quite fit the stereotypical mold. DiCaprio had spent his career playing troubled, introspective characters, and his potential as romantic lead was yet to be discovered. Additionally, convincing Leo wasn't as simple as handing him a script and a handshake. Fresh from Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet, DiCaprio was wary of another romance role, a part that might typecast him as just another love-struck teen. His agent even demanded a $4 million fee.
Leo is a guy who, fortunately, understands his gift well enough to be able to go to the hardest thing he can find. You know, so he's a lot like me in that sense. He looks for the challenge, and he didn't want to make this picture.
I don't really like sort of these gigantic, huge films for some reason. They seem to be a lot more about the special effects and less about actually a story with content, you know.
I think he thought it was going to be kind of a square-jawed action hero, which of course he's not. He's a very complex character, but he's also very pure of heart, so he wasn't finding the handles as an actor. It took me 3 months to convince him that it was very, very hard to do what he ultimately wound up doing.
Cameron insisted that Jack is a character who in the past would have been played by Jimmy Stewart or Gary Cooper, actors capable of making an ordinary man so compelling that he dominated the screen.
I saw that in the Nickelodeon once and I always wanted to do it.
He told Leo that this would be the most challenging role of his career.
Almost.
In the end, DiCaprio was sold on the vision, and the studio agreed on a fee of $2.5 million. Interestingly, Winslet earned only $1 million. Cameron had stubbornly maintained that the only diva on his set would be Titanic itself, not the actors. Yet, in a delicious stroke of irony that could have only come from Hollywood, neither of his humble, unstarry leads stayed humble or unstarry for long. As filming began, Romeo and Juliet catapulted Leo to near-cult status. And Kate, who Cameron had been reluctant to cast due to her extensive period drama background, was nominated for an Academy Award for her performance in a period piece.
If there was any true impropriety in my behavior, I should be sensible of it, Helena.
For the role of Cal Hockley, James zeroed in on Billy Zane, already a veteran of film and TV, though not yet a household name.
Horrible, isn't it?
Zane initially balked at playing yet another villain, insisting that he was tired of being the generic bad guy. Cameron, having none of it, twisted his arm until he said yes. Zane's smug, aristocratic performance was so memorably hiss-worthy that even he had to admit that playing villains could be fun.
What could possibly be funny?
While Zane was frequently cast as the villain, Frances Fisher emerged as Hollywood's quintessential screen mom. She showed up for her Titanic audition in full English lady mode. And immediately got the part of Ruth DeWitt Bukater, mother to Rose and champion of strict etiquette. But not all supporting roles were fictional. The stoic Captain Edward John Smith, a very real figure, demanded dignified gravitas. Reportedly, Robert De Niro was suggested early on, but fate intervened when he was hospitalized. In stepped Bernard Hill, who outclassed 40 other contenders. Casting director Mary Finn recalled that as soon as Hill donned a captain's cap and glowered, it was like Smith himself had marched into the room.
He was an interesting actor to work with because I always felt like he wasn't doing enough. And then I'd watch the dailies and I'd realize it was all there. It was in his eyes somehow.
The same kind of magic happened with Thomas Andrews, the Titanic's meticulous designer. Victor Garber earned the gig by radiating both intelligence and kindness.
He was a difficult character to cast. I was looking for somebody that had the intelligence that Andrews clearly had. You know, and at the same time, Andrews is known to be a warm, likable guy, and who was a very sympathetic and even heroic figure during the sinking. So I was lucky to find Victor. He was one of the last parts cast.
I'm sorry, but that didn't build you a stronger ship.
For Bruce Ismay, the White Star Line VIP blindsided by his unsinkable dream, Cameron sought an English actor with suitably stiff upper lip vibes. He spotted Jonathan Hind in Jumanji and knew instantly Hyde could embody both pride and mounting panic as the ship's watery fate approached.
But the ship can't sink.
Finally, Cameron's biggest name was Kathy Bates as the unsinkable Molly Brown. For Bates to get her $500,000 fee on the film, Cameron would have to kick in $150,000 of his own.
God, very nice.
Meantime, Rosarito's coastal desert soon transformed into the world's biggest set. The resulting town sprouted sound stages, workshops, and the centerpiece, a ship set nearly 750 feet long, towering 8 stories high, all perched on a tank capable of holding about 17 million gallons of water.
This thing was enormous. I mean, this wasn't some little set. This was massive, 80-story building on its side.
Indoors, work didn't stop either. Designers pored over Cameron's expedition footage and rare archival photos. Historians oversaw every rivet, every White Star Line insignia. They even commissioned the original manufacturer to weave the same pattern for the Titanic's dining room floor, a detail that no audience member would consciously notice, yet which cost a small fortune.
This is actually the dining room. We're going to see this in two different situations. The first one is everyone's dolled up very, very nicely in their first-class attire. But then later on, we're actually going to have to tilt this thing and drop it 30 feet into a tank of freezing cold seawater.
Another remarkable set was the Grand Staircase.
We're trying to use real oak, so pretty much we're actually building this as they built it on the Titanic.
I don't know if people realise that we had made it more grand than it really was.
People today are just bigger, and two people could hardly pass abreast of each other on either side of this center banister.
So we added about 18 inches either side, and it just eased it out, and it did look great.
After 30 years of studying the ship so intently and painting the ship so many times, 100 times, to see this thing in 3 dimensions and be standing here, I am absolutely speechless.
Still, not every set was built full scale. The first-class lounge, for instance, existed only partly on set.
That's a model, by the way. I promised the studio I was not going to build the first-class lounge, and so we didn't. We built it as a model and did a composite scene, which probably cost more than if we had just built the set, but promise is a promise.
At quarter scale, you can get a lot of realism. It basically relied on our miniature to pick up all the slack. I was really happy that they felt that our miniature was good enough to be used as those kind of backgrounds.
If there was any place where Titanic's famed luxury truly shone, it was in the first-class suites. But the real show stealer there was a humble clock that ended up meaning far more than mere set dressing.
The crazy thing about all this is we made the movie in '96, and in 2005 we got into the Strauss suite on B deck, and it looked just like the fake set.
The most excited I've ever seen you.
We are in the Strauss cabin, yes. Oh, say it's not the clock. Say it is not the clock on the mantle. Oh my God. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, look. It was like a little bubble of perfect preservation.
That clock holds an important forensic clue. That clock has the time that this cabin flooded. And we know the times on the chronometer on the bridge. So if we can get the time off that clock and match it to the time on the bridge chronometer, we have the rate of Titanic sinking.
Rose and Cal's parlor suite had actually been reserved for J. Pierpont Morgan, the Napoleon of Wall Street, who bailed on Titanic at the last minute in favor of leisurely massages and sulfur baths in France, meaning that in real life, the sumptuous stateroom never saw a single occupant. While hundreds of workers toiled away in Rosarito to build Cameron's Titanic sets, the director grabbed a small crew and hopped back aboard the academic Mstislav Keldysh to shoot the modern-day storyline. The ship's captain, Dr. Anatoly Saglovich, even had a cameo in the film. For these scenes, he invited his old-timer Bill Paxton, who took on the role of treasure hunter Brock Lovett.
This better be good.
Paxton was thrilled not just to work with Cameron again, but to bunk on the Keldysh. According to Paxton, the story of the Titanic had me hooked so deeply I couldn't let it go. Indeed, he'd returned for further expeditions with Cameron and Louis Abernathy in the years following the film.
So what happened next?
Abernathy, by the way, wasn't just playing one of Brock's crew. He literally was the guy in real life. Cameron based the character of Louis on him. And when it came time to cast the role, he couldn't find anyone better.
I called him up at his bar that he owns in Texas and said, Louis, you got to play yourself. Can't find anybody to play you. And he said, all right, if you want to fuck up your movie by casting me, you go right ahead.
Next up,
Happy
Titanic.
hunting. All right. Happy hunting, brother man.
Then there was Gloria Stewart, cast as the older Rose, once a Hollywood ingenue in the 1930s.
Thank you.
Stewart had quit acting for decades before coming out of retirement. She was in her 80s, and Cameron's makeup department had to age her even further with prosthetics.
Of course, Gloria had mixed feelings about that, since her big return to the screen after having been retired for 30 years or so was in an age makeup that made her look much older than she really was.
Reflection has changed a bit.
Susie Amos had been cast as Old Rose's granddaughter, a modest role that never launched her to mega stardom. But it did lead her straight to Cameron's heart.
And we just met on this film. We're now happily married and have 4 children.
But no filming adventure is complete without a bizarre twist, and Titanic certainly had one. The infamous PCP chowder incident. On the final night of shooting in Nova Scotia, cast and crew were served clam chowder that had been, well, tampered with, shall we say.
But I remember going back to my trailer after lunch, and Jim went up to his office, and I heard a commotion, and I opened up my door, and I saw a couple of ambulances pulling in, and then an AD ran up and said, well, did you eat the clam chowder? And I thought, well, yeah, I had a couple of bowls. And about that time, I started to witness some bizarre behavior with the crew and stuff.
Apparently, a disgruntled staffer decided to give the production an unintentional acid test. Cast and crew were overwhelmed by hallucinations, nausea, and general pandemonium. Though the incident ended in a hospital run and a day's lost work, everyone pulled through, none the worse for a truly surreal experience. Also on Keldysh was cinematographer Caleb Deschanel, whose dreamy lighting on the natural and the right stuff looked like the perfect fit for a lush period film. On paper, it seemed a match made in celluloid heaven, until Cameron's style collided with Deschanel's.
That was a sort of mutual thing. He had been directing himself. I think he was more comfortable with the type of filmmaker who spends all their time with the actors and isn't so concerned with the image and likes to be kind of the maestro of that area. And that's very, very good for some directors, but I like to be involved in everything. I'm very hands-on and not because of some, aberrational psychological need to have control. It's really because I love all aspects of filmmaking.
Enter Russell Carpenter, the cinematographer from True Lies, who'd proven he could keep pace with Cameron's relentless, detail-obsessed approach. Despite the fact that Carpenter shot all of the test scenes, he assumed he'd missed his shot.
Indeed, it went to Caleb Deschanel, excellent cinematographer. So I did Brett Ratner's Money Talk. Halfway through the middle of Money Talk, Patty fielded a call from John Landau, and John said, I've noticed that things aren't really going too well between Jim and Caleb. We don't know what we're doing now, but he just wanted to know what I was doing. I said, I'm in the middle of a production. And that was the end of that. Except like 2 weeks later, another phone call came in.
Carpenter couldn't just ditch Money Talks, but fortunately, director Brett Ratner took it remarkably well. So Carpenter packed up and hustled, racing south to the brand new studio by the sea, where dust and bulldozers coexisted with the early stages of the world's largest water tank. It was both thrilling and terrifying. Every time he returned, another monstrous building loomed. All the while, Cameron's countdown to day one of filming ticked away.
In some ways, Jim and I didn't talk about aesthetics. I asked him, well, what are we talking about this film looking like? And he says, well, you know what these pictures look like.
Translation? No time for deep debates about light design. Just study John Singer Sargent, maybe rewatch Howard's End and The Natural, then strap in for the greatest show Cameron had ever staged. With a mere 2.5 weeks until Titanic started rolling, Carpenter likened it to a giant wave about to crash on him. Yet bit by bit, he assembled a crew that matched Cameron's relentless pace. The result would seal Carpenter's place in movie history, proving that even if you're a last-minute sub, you can still be excellent. Before we dive headlong into the actual filming, there's one more crucial piece of the puzzle: costumes.
What are you planning to wear?
You can't have a proper period epic without oceans of period attire. Enter Deborah Lynn Scott, the costume designer behind E.T. and Back to the Future, who spent a full year with a 50-person team building a wardrobe that could simultaneously survive soaking and sell the glamorous world of 1912.
We made a very concerted effort to find as many authentic pieces as we could. When people go to do a period film, that you're starting from the ground up, you're starting with the corsets and the underwear and the garters and the stockings, and it's a lot of pieces. It's a tremendous accoutrement of accessories. Actors tend to really like that. As they dress themselves, they realize what it felt like to be that person back then.
Deborah knew the logistics would be an uphill battle, or rather a down-in-the-water battle. Actors wore wetsuits under their finery, and everything had to be dried between takes in a giant heated closet. Many of the surviving costumes still bear the scars of Titanic's watery scenes. Rose's wardrobe alone is practically its own character arc. She begins in that iconic white striped boarding suit inspired by an Amy Linker & Company design spotted in a 1912 Le Mode magazine. Later, we see her laced tightly into a corset by her mother. Visual shorthand for Rose's stifling engagement to Cal. By contrast, there's the moment she literally bears it all for Jack, wearing nothing but the heart of the ocean, itself an homage to the Hope Diamond's famous necklace. One of the film's most understated but powerful uses of costume is the red jump dress. Its delicate beating softly chimes against the boat railing when Rose contemplates ending her life. If you force yourself not to blink while watching Titanic next time, you might spot Deborah's cameo on the grand staircase, sporting a red fan. But let's return to the main shooting location. On a winding road, producer John Landau steers a van parked with visitors. He rounds a bend, and Titanic's towering shell juts from the Rosarito coastline.
They had no idea. They would come over a hill from 2 miles away from the studio, and over the knoll, they would see Titanic there against the water backdrop.
Crews wrestle with the lighting on this colossal set. Standard rigs from Hollywood didn't cut it.
It wasn't just building the set. It was building all the stuff to shoot and light the set. It was adding a layer to it that we hadn't really anticipated, that all the normal Hollywood lighting tools, photography tools, went out the window.
He spotted a tall construction crane on rails meant to hold giant reflectors for naturalistic light. That sparked idea.
He realized that he could hang a camera from under the tower and basically get pseudo-helicopter shots of the entire ship.
The crane, originally built to hoist reflectors and 3 10-kilowatt lamps, became more than a fancy lighting rig. Cameron had a cage welded to the tower's tip, big enough for himself, cinematographer Russell Carpenter, and 2 camera techs. From that perch, he had a full view of the set. Workers trundled the crane along its rails, sweeping past funnel tops and lifeboat davits. Cameron, high above the deck, called out directions through a headset. 2,000 extras gather on the set, crammed into wool coats and straw hats, speaking a mix of English and Spanish. They're recreating Southampton's bustling port on the day Titanic set sail.
We made the decision to only build one side of the ship, and in doing so, we ended up building the starboard side of the ship. It forced us to locate Southampton Dock on that side to shoot the whole sequence, but in fact, in history, it was on the port side.
Let's see, if I have a scene that takes place on the port side, but I only have the starboard hull, then I have to shoot the scene on the starboard side and then turn the film around mirror image later.
This flopping thing, I just haven't been able to get my head around at all. You know, 1 minute my parting's on this side, the next minute, no, we're flopped, so it's on that side.
Where were you standing again? Who was on your right? Okay, well, if they were on your right, they're going to be on your left. And you were holding hands with your right hand, so, and turn your hat around, and it was a nightmare.
If you were there on that day and you looked at the terminal building that said White Star Line, that writing was all backwards.
And it just started to make me laugh when I'd see men with White Star Line written across their hats just backwards. I couldn't quite get my head around it, so I just sort of gave up.
It's just not something you want to do. But, you know, we saved millions by not building that other side of the ship.
Digital Domain's visual effects team fills in the rest. 40-foot miniatures of Titanic glide past green-screened extras waving from a parking lot. Water, smoke, and seagulls appear with a few clicks of a mouse. Next came what the crew casually dubbed the $1 million shot.
If you didn't appreciate the ship, you couldn't appreciate the sinking. So you had to appreciate it in the terms that people felt about it before they knew they were on the Titanic. It both celebrates the ship and it celebrates Jack's character at the same time. It just makes it seem like the idea that you're going to die are so far away and so impossible to conceive. And if you don't start from that place, you'll never understand what it was like to be on that ship.
I'm the king of the world!
Pulling it off demanded every trick in Digital Domain's arsenal. The production team shot DiCaprio and Danny Nucci on a green screen turntable, then morphed them into CG doubles halfway through, and composited them into a 40-foot Titanic miniature, dropped in digital water and digital smoke, digital birds, and digital body doubles for every person in the shot.
I think we spent $1 million on this shot, which of course you could do it for probably 1/10 of that right now. It also took a long time. I remember it taking like 6 months. Still a pretty shot though.
Watching that scene now, the digital extras feel eerie, like they're almost human, but move in a way that undercuts the illusion. The practical stuff, timeless. The CG at times, one big neon sign pointing into the uncanny valley. After Cameron showcased Titanic in all its glory, he shifted focus to smaller, more personal moments. One of them took place near the stern, where Rose nearly plunges into the icy water at night.
The scene became the cover set, and it just became a major pain in the neck to recreate this scene over and over and over again whenever the weather got bad. So this scene, which in the film takes place over a few minutes, was shot over several months.
Rehearsals felt like patchwork. Green screen on one side, painted black drops on another, and a black void on the third. Final footage captured over several months showed Kate Winslet suspended on the rail while Leonardo DiCaprio coaxed her down. Cameron described the process as taming a spooked horse.
See, the whole idea is to engage her without spooking her. Play like it's not even about her. It's like walking up to a horse. You have to do it slow. Oh, absolutely. You know what I mean?
Cameron also snuck in a cameo for veteran actor Bernard Fox. He'd once played Frederick Fleet in A Night to Remember. Now he returned as Colonel Gracie, part of Cameron's nod to the classic film that inspired him.
And it was funny because Bernard was actually talking to the actor that plays Frederick Fleet in this film, who'd been hanging around for about 6 weeks waiting to shoot his scene in the crow's nest. He asked him, so when you did A Night to Remember, how long were you around to play Fleet? And Bernard said, I think I was on set for about half a day.
Jesus. Next, it was the scene which nearly everyone told Cameron to cut.
Disgusting!
I remember nobody liked it. Kate and Leo didn't like it. The studio didn't like it. Peter Chernin didn't like it, but I liked it. And I think Kate and Leo finally figured out what I was trying to do with it before we shot the scene. I always felt that people have a certain expectation of what a Titanic movie is supposed to be, and I didn't want to be making that movie. I always said, this isn't your dad's Titanic movie. And when he's standing there in front of Rose's mom with a big, goober hanging out of his mouth, it works. The audience is right there, they get it, because everybody has embarrassed themselves against boyfriend or girlfriend's parents in some way, and they get it, they get that social moment. So now you're there, you're in that moment. The time machine has worked to put you on the deck of Titanic.
Winslet later improvised a callback, spitting in Cal's face, surprising Billy Zane and giving the arc a neat bookend. At dinner, further culture clashes erupted. The conflict, tension, and countless takes.
Got everything I need right here with me. Got lungs in my air. What was my line?
Air in my lungs.
Got air in my lungs. A couple blank pieces of paper. Here I am on the grandest ship in the world, having champagne with you fine people. I'll take some.
In the end, Leo delivered the perfect final line as an exclamation point.
Time for me to go row with the other slaves.
I had something lame there, like, time to turn back into a pumpkin or something, and he came up with that, which I thought perfectly expressed the kind of class difference.
The cameras rolled on the third-class party scene, thick wool suits, heavy dresses, heat from the rigging, people sweating under the glare. Yet the energy was undeniable.
Now this party, this was, I think, probably the most fun moment of shooting the film.
He aimed for raw, boisterous energy, letting the band play long after official wrap. The cast sweltered in wool costumes, but no one wanted to leave. Cameron called it a perfect release for all the tension piling up during production.
I felt like the camera was dancing with the people. This is faked here. Kate couldn't really do this ballet move. It's a pretty difficult thing to do, especially without the proper toe shoes on. We had a dancer come in and double for her feet. In the wide shot, she's being held up by a wire, and she actually did go up on point, but not with her full weight.
You all right?
I haven't done that in years.
The kiss scene had the opposite mood, a hushed, romantic promise in the golden hour. Yet it was also a kind of a dance of editing. It was shot in multiple pieces with various backgrounds and relied on many visual effects. But for the actual kiss, Cameron wanted to capture it in natural light.
There was a big discussion with the DP and the gaffer, and we were looking at how to get this natural light for this scene. And I said, guys, I think today might be the day. And they said, no. The gaffer looked up at the sky and said, no, this cloud cover is not going to break. And I said, I got a feeling. And the sky just opened up with this glorious rosy light, and Kate came out.
Sunset's amazing, go, go, go. And we'd be like, what? And suddenly Leo and I are having to basically climb up this
damn ladder. So we'd get up there and then we'd have like 2 minutes of just endlessly doing this clinch and the clinch and again. And then God forbid if we started laughing. Oh my God. I mean, it was really, really honestly hilarious. Hilarious.
But this right here is exactly what God gave us that day.
Right after the kiss comes the drawing scene, one of the most intimate moments in the film, but oddly enough, it was shot early on.
This was like one of our first couple days of shooting. One of the very first things that Kate Winslet and Leonardo had to do was, get naked.
Kate and Leo barely knew each other, and James used that tension to his advantage.
Over on the bed, the couch.
Leo's slip was a genuine accident. Cameron liked its awkward honesty and kept it in. As for the artwork,
and I was hoping that Leo might be able to do a few lines of the drawing, but as great an artist as he is as an actor, it turned out that he didn't have a whole lot of talent for drawing. So this is my hand here.
Being a lefty, he had to film his own hand drawing, then flip the image, much like Southampton's scene on a miniature scale. For actual drawing, Cameron had snapped a few photos of Kate wearing a bikini, then filled in details from his imagination. All the other Jack Dawson drawings in the movie also came from Cameron's pencil, many done in post-production. In that sense, the director was channeling a bit of himself through Jack's character, even made a cameo as a most talented part of Jack's body.
And somehow my 41-year-old hand at the time, nobody seems to question that it's his 19-year-old hand.
Now, since we're following the established storyline, let's follow the main characters into the boiler room.
Hold on. What are you two doing down here?
This set piece could have burned through a huge chunk of the budget if Martin Lang and Peter Lamont hadn't employed that old trick with mirrors.
We only built 2.5 boilers and then stuck a mirror on the end. So you were able to look into the mirror and it looked as if the boilers repeated all the way down through the ship. It was a fun bit of movie magic.
At the same time, the lion's share of shot here was done by cutting-edge technology. Much of the boiler room was built using models, motion control matching, and a host of complex techniques. The crew even found a World War II Liberty ship, the Jeremy O'Brien, which had triple expansion reciprocating engines, essentially a 1/3 scale version of Titanic's engine. Model makers built 1/3 scale lights and catwalks, and they treated the shoot like a model production.
One of the things I learned from Jim is the key is never do the same trick twice. Just when you think, they're doing it with motion control and a background, you change it and now it's a real engine room. And then you cut to another shot and it's a green screen foreground with a background of the model. If you always mix the techniques up, you're bound for a much better success than relying on one technique for the entire film.
Despite all these tricks, most viewers remember the cargo hold instead, specifically the Renault-type CB Town car. According to Titanic's cargo manifest, such a car was actually on board and belonged to a first-class American, William Carter, who survived the sinking and later sued White Star Line for $5,000. Cameron ordered a replica of that Renault, relying on detailed documentation. The exterior closely resembled the original, but beneath the body panels, a Ford T chassis without engine or transmission was hidden. Even the wheels couldn't turn. After all, Jack and Rose never planned to drive it. The red Renault, the sole car in the cargo hold, was disassembled and carefully boxed for transport. In reality, that famous love scene could never have happened, yet Cameron didn't seem too troubled by that detail.
I just couldn't resist the idea of a couple of teenagers wanting to make out in the backseat of a car. Even back in 1912, I'm sure that was going on.
Next, the film shows the collision with the iceberg.
Oh, yes. There, look at this.
So I guess what we're saying here is that Titanic sunk because of their kiss.
Well, let's not blame the lovebirds for the fate of an unsinkable ship. Instead, let's examine how that scene was shot. To simulate the interaction between the main characters and the iceberg, the team dumped a load of ice on deck while using a motion control camera and a large green screen behind the set. Then they filmed a miniature iceberg with the same camera move on a motion control stage, using interactive lighting from the ship's windows. And all those components were composited together into the final shot. Now let's skip ahead to one of the film's most suspenseful moments. Jack is handcuffed to a pipe. Later, as water rushes in, Rose, wielding an axe, busts him out. This sequence was shot very early in production, basically in week 1, because Cameron needed something to shoot while the giant exterior set, as well as the interior set on hydraulic lifts, weren't ready. They improvised by building a small angled set inside a steel tank so it could be flooded from all sides. The heroic barbarian Rose wielding her axe was filmed during these early days, while her entire journey to find Jack was shot later, after the main interior sets were completed.
I love this shot of her running with the axe. It's just so far from the way her character is first introduced, getting out of the car with the purple hat, and here she is.
No acting was required for the icy plunge because they pumped in frigid ocean water with no heating.
I remember it being really cold. I operated this shot. I was wearing a wetsuit and hand-holding the camera, and I was petrified that I was going to drop the whole camera in the water.
I don't think, Jim, I ever really saw Leo and I doing all this stuff. I think I saw kind of little cartoon figures or something, and I don't know what I imagined really, but nothing could have prepared me for what it really was, because some of it was very, very tough, but incredibly exhilarating at the same time.
And was Leo is the right word, a crutch? I mean, did the pair of you kind of like shoulder?
Oh, he complained about the cold water all the time.
A lot of the water stuff has been really rough just because I'm really temperature sensitive.
And I was just, oh, come on, don't be such a wuss.
Oh, shit, this is cold.
So, in short, hours in cold, dark hallways, zero fun, definitely scarier than your average film set.
It's been a horrible, horrible place to be. The lights would have gone out, it would have been dark, you would have been lost, you wouldn't have known where you were. Even when we're shooting it and the lights went out, it was scary. Imagine the actual real thing happening. Not very nice.
I think that's one of the most dangerous things a director can face in terms of putting human beings in with water, because everybody underestimates the force of water.
The sequence in the hallway was also a testament to the film's digital trickery. It featured the first face replacement in film history. Kate and Leo's stunt doubles did the run while being blasted by water at 20 miles per hour. Later, the VFX team seamlessly replaced the doubles' faces with our fearless lead.
And these were tricky stunts to do safely. Everybody was fine, but man, this is the kind of stuff that can really go wrong, so you really have to know what you're doing here.
Not every corridor on screen was a full-size set. One of the film's most striking corridor sequences was actually achieved through a miniature.
I think our model was probably about 20 or 30 feet long. That was really a challenge because it's quite long, and we had to create all these wall panels out of balsa wood and fix them so that they would break realistically.
They routed water from an elevated tank through pipes to each door, timing the burst so that the doors would buckle precisely as the camera dolly moved past. Capturing everything in slow motion created a seamless impression of a rapidly flooding corridor.
DD did this great miniature shot, but Jim didn't think it was quite working when he first saw it until he rotated the shot in editing so that it was tilted, and that made all the difference.
Let's move to the dining room, where the scale of Cameron's interior sets becomes more apparent. The dining room was built on a massive rotating platform measuring over 7,500 square feet, set inside a giant concrete reservoir about 16 feet deep. Motors at the base tilted the platform so one side went fully underwater.
So on one set, on the interior stage set, we had the dining room and at least several stories of the grand staircase. It was huge interior structure. And the thing about that was amazing, that as all the tables went underwater, all of the china lifted off because it was all set for breakfast service. These bowls and cups floated, and they kind of tinkled together as the current swirled as the water came in, and it turned into this almost giant ghostly wind chime kind of sound. It was very eerie, and it was just amazing to think that's what really happened.
Imagine how challenging it was, like filling a bowl with cereal and milk, then draining the milk, drying every piece, and putting them back exactly where they belong. And they did that 6 times.
So put it back to the starting level.
Reset, please.
The staircase flood was even more demanding. The scene was filmed in 2 steps. First, the crew flooded the stairwell. Then captured a massive waterfall bursting through the illuminated ceiling dome. 3 cargo containers, each holding over 47,500 gallons of water, were placed above the set. They were opened simultaneously, causing the water to break through the glass and pour down the staircase, carrying stunt performers with it. Despite these massive set pieces, the production still found corners to cut. The first-class lounge, for instance, was designed level for early scenes, and when it needed to look tilted in later shots with Victor Garber, they simply angled the camera and instructed the actors to lean. Wine and shot glasses were molded as solid gel pieces, intentionally pre-angled to appear leaning, and the crew removed them from the mantelpiece to sell the illusion. The production team eventually turned its focus to filming the most intense moments of the story, the actual sinking of the ship.
We had to rebuild the entire set at an angle after we had finished shooting the ship level.
To accomplish this, the sinking liner consisted of 2 main sections, a movable bow and a stationary stern. The massive tank holding these pieces contained around 63,000 tons of ocean water.
To show the ship actually sinking, we had to adjust the ship to a 6-degree angle. We then disconnect the front 180 feet of the ship and put it on hydraulic cables that will raise and lower it. You will actually see the front section of the ship on camera go underwater as the water pours up on actors.
So this shows you how big the set was. This is all real.
Not surprisingly, shooting on such a large scale demanded a formidable lighting setup. With over 600 portals, each needing its own dedicated light, and countless practical lights built into the set, the scope quickly ballooned. Certain lights had to function underwater, others had to be safe above water, and all needed ground fault protection. When the production submitted an order for more than 40 miles of cable, over 1,000 movie lights, and more than 1,000 practical lights, the studio initially questioned why so much was required. However, after 2 veteran lighting experts visited, they agreed the film crew still didn't have enough. To put it in perspective, in a typical production, you might only need a grip team of 4 to 6 people and a similarly sized electrical crew. For Titanic, however, they required 84 grips and 76 electricians. It was like building a city. Even details like the musicians on the ship's deck were more than just cinematic flair.
Nobody knows whether this really happened this way or not, but it seems plausible, and it is certainly known that the band did play until the last minutes.
In a similar pursuit of authenticity, the production even secured davits, the lifeboat lowering mechanisms, from the original manufacturer, the Welland Davit Company, based on their old plans, making them effectively real Titanic davits.
And background and action!
Once the ship reached its final moments on screen, production followed suit with the most chaotic and dangerous scenes. Mass jumps, rapid slides, and a stern rising to near vertical. The jump sequence alone involved 40 people leaping off the ship in one shot. Contrary to how it looks, there was only a narrow stretch of water about 3 feet deep, extending roughly 20 feet from the vessel's side. The rest of the tank was too shallow for safe landing. Floating dummies with life jackets or rubber deck chairs marked areas where stunt performers could aim. Some jumped from the equivalent of a 5-story building, requiring precise coordination to avoid serious injury. Miraculously, only a handful of bruises were reported. Another intense challenge was sliding on the deck. The set itself spanned over 400 feet, but the ship's actual tilt remained at a mere 6 degrees. Much of the apparent steepness was an illusion created by rolling the camera.
We had to make it look as though people were at a 45-degree angle and sliding down the deck. And we'd made these very small sleds with casters on. Once the cable pulled you, and it would pull you very, very fast, it would release. But then you could actually spin 360 degrees. It actually worked very well.
The next major feat was the stern sequence, which combined large-scale practical effects with cutting-edge digital work.
The ship going to vertical was one of the greater challenges. We decided to build a giant teeter-totter of the stern of the ship. It would be at level, but then it could go up to 90 degrees. I remember the first night, if we got it to 90 degrees, we had a cable that we needed to bring it back down. And the first night we were filming, that cable broke. Now, as a producer, I thought it'd be really smart to have my wife and 8-year-old son on there to show to everybody I thought it was safe. And there they were stuck there for several hours.
Falling stunts required a mix of real actors and stunt people, plus carefully placed foam or rubber elements. Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet performed from 80 feet in the air.
I feel like I'm on top of the world.
Hey, Jack, I feel like I'm flying.
Secured by cables, but many stunt performers weren't cabled. Up to 150 extras and 90 stunt professionals tumbled in every direction, wearing protective pads under their costumes.
Very early on in the prep, I got together with Rob Legato, the visual effects supervisor, and we were going through sequences where it was impossible for stunt performers to actually do these things without seriously getting hurt. We did lots of tests with Rob, like we had people fall off 40-foot or 60-foot rostrums into airbags.
We shot with 2 cameras and basically did our version of motion capture, which we called it roto capture. At some point, the connection with the rest of the ship, we would have to do sort of a digital set extension and a digital stunt extension for that.
So the falls would all start for real, and then CG guy would take over. I think the combination of the two worked out extremely well.
By the time Titanic lumbered into its third act of production, Cameron was juggling daily costs of about $1 to $2 million. At this point, you might guess that the original $110 million budget was, to put it gently, inadequate.
We have lots of money left over. Everything's going like butter. Everything's just smooth as can be.
And with every delay, miscalculation, and deep-sea-sized idea, that shortfall only grew more alarming.
This is bad.
If money burned like fuel, they certainly wouldn't have burned through it as quickly as they did on this picture.
I've never been on a job where everything just went like clockwork like that.
It's amazing.
It is startling.
Meanwhile, as the schedule kept slipping, the press bombarded the director and studio with mocking headlines, practically taking bets on which day the budget would fully implode.
We were the biggest idiots in the history of Hollywood, and we were going to go down in flames like nobody'd seen. And this is going on while we're trying to finish the film. We're struggling with being over budget on visual effects, trying to make our deadline, and Variety is running Titanic Watch, this little column on the front page of Variety every single day.
Oh, not to worry.
Fox was sweating bullets. Paramount had capped its exposure at $65 million, so every overrun fell back on Fox's plate.
And Fox doesn't want the money back, you know? They've already allocated it for the movie. They don't want any more cash back, so...
Naturally, they tried renegotiating Cameron's contract, asking him to give up not just his box office share, but even half of what he'd make on his next movie.
Great. Doesn't this look great?
Hard to blame them. At the time, most in Hollywood believed they'd never recoup a cent of this colossal sinkhole. Fox's Peter Chernin admitted that
we could have tried to cut $30–40 million out at some point, and what I ultimately felt was that our only hope was to plow full speed ahead and try and make a great movie.
Call it stubbornness or foresight, but they stuck with it. After all, if you're going to gamble on a ship, best bet on the biggest one afloat.
Do you know of Dr. Freud? His ideas about the male preoccupation with size might be of particular interest to you.
At the very end of production, they set up a green screen in a small tank and tried to drown Kate and Leo.
So this was toward the end of the shooting, and Kate and Leo needed to be on scuba to be able to do this. Turned out that Leo was a pretty good scuba diver, but Kate had never done it before, so we gave her a little bit of a crash course. She only had to hold her breath and be a couple of feet under the water, but I remember her looking at me like, I know you saved this till the last, in case I die doing this scuba. She was not happy on scuba.
Yeah, that's scary.
Due to delays in building the main set, the actual ending was shot at the beginning of the schedule. Actors were floating in a 4-foot-deep indoor tank with an artificial horizon.
The performers were forced to crouch down to create an illusion that the tank was deeper than the 4 feet that it actually was.
Interestingly, the water in those scenes wasn't very cold. Extras would stay in for several hours, and the cold breath effect was added later.
What we're doing is we're shooting the breath element. The person is behind a black mask, and all we capture is just this delicate breath material going by.
We wound up with whatever 100 shots of digital breath, and nobody knew if it would work or not, so it was a big gamble. But I figured if George Lucas could populate every other shot in Star Wars with a lightsaber or a laser, we could put some digital breath in.
Of course, the biggest mystery that kept fans up at night wasn't about iceberg trajectory or watertight compartments. It was that door. You know the one. Could Jack have squeezed on alongside Rose, or was he doomed to become a popsicle the minute she spread out on that raft? Since the public refused to let it go, Cameron and his crew did what any self-respecting filmmaker would do. They tested it with science.
Yeah, let's see if he could have lived.
They headed down to Dr. Jim Cotter's lab in New Zealand, accompanied by stunt performers who matched Jack and Rose in age, height, and weight. Then built an exact replica of that famous raft, right down to the freeboard and buoyancy. The results? 20 minutes in frigid, simulated Titanic water, and Jack was already clinically hypothermic. Even when they tried alternate setups, from hugging for warmth to redistributing the raft's buoyancy, there just wasn't enough surface area to keep both afloat without partial submersion. A 2-hour wait for rescue? Not a chance. Cameron, ever the detail man, brought up a real-life case, a Chinese passenger who survived clinging to debris.
We actually shot that scene. My assistant at the time was a guy named Van Ling, and I said, Van, get in the water. So Van got out there and was yelling in Mandarin to be rescued.
In the end, Cameron decided that while Jack might have lived through some miraculous alignment of conditions, it would have meant rolling the dice with Rose's life.
Final verdict, Jack might have lived, but there's a lot of variables. So based on what I know today, I would have made the raft smaller. So there's no doubt.
Now, you might think Cameron's biggest regret was that infamously spacious door. Turns out, the only thing he truly wished he'd handled differently was First Officer William Murdoch. In the film, Murdoch fires a gun in a moment of panic. Great for drama, but problematic for real-life legacies.
But I was being a screenwriter. I wasn't thinking about being a historian. And I think I wasn't as sensitive about the fact that his family might feel offended by that. And they were. I feel like I should have made him more of a generic character, and just then it could have been any one of a number of people who were at that place at that time.
Once the camera stopped rolling, the extras packed up, and one of Hollywood's grandest sets was consigned to demolition. The Titanic replica was reduced to scrap metal. Gone.
Pretty cool, huh?
Only the empty foundation pits on Mexico's coast remain as a memorial to the colossal shoot. Meanwhile, Cameron secluded himself in the editing room with longtime collaborators Richard Harris and Conrad Buff. With 1.5 million feet of film to sift through, you might wonder why he didn't invite a few more editors to join the party.
To me, the editing room was my bunker. And I said, I'm not coming out of this bunker till I have a great movie. I figured my career was over. There was no hope of making a dime. And I probably would never get to direct again. But I was going to go down swinging. We were going to make the best possible movie we could.
By May of '97, it was painfully clear the film needed more time. The effects, the score, the dubbing, the final sound mix, everything was lagging. Fox pushed the release date to December 19th, warning Cameron he'd better make good on all that blood, sweat, and mostly salt water. And make good he did. Although the result was too long, dozens of scenes hit the cutting room floor, from Rose's tearful meltdown after dinner to an extended chase through flooded corridors. A grand finale involving Rose dramatically tossing the diamond in front of a stunned crew also got trimmed. Cameron even decided to open the film with a sync simulation to save some time from explanations further in the story.
It is pretty cheeky that you're going to show everybody the end of the movie. Not only are people standing in line outside the movie theater saying, why am I standing in this line? I know what happens. But once they're watching the movie, you're going to show them the ending. But the syncing simulation animation, I think, was critical to an understanding of what's going on in those last few minutes.
In the end, he trimmed it down to 194 minutes. Still, one of the longest run times in major Hollywood production history.
Hold on just a little bit longer.
It's no wonder the studio was worried. Given the recent debacles of Waterworld and Heaven's Gate, they wondered if Titanic could do any better. Meanwhile, Cameron was completely run ragged, gaining 30 pounds and losing all sense of the outside world.
Are you burnt out from Titanic?
Totally burnt out.
Yeah.
There's no denying that Cameron's reputation as a dictatorial director reached a fever pitch during Titanic.
Here we are on the bridge of the set of Titanic, and down here there was just quite an altercation. Jim got so upset with a cast member that he turned on his freezing rays and shattered him. But that wasn't enough. He's now scattering the remains all over the forward well deck.
Yet the same guy who allegedly terrorized crews also made sure to help his friends in real-life crisis. Consider Guillermo del Toro. While Cameron was editing, del Toro's father was kidnapped in Guadalajara. Cameron immediately offered to foot the ransom or at least hire the best negotiator, and did at his own expense.
And then he came in and he took charge. He said, the hostage negotiator will be in your house in 72 hours to help you go through the process. He did it on his own. We didn't ask, he volunteered, and he did offer. He said, I'll pay for the ransom.
As post-production moved forward and Cameron was pushing every limit, run times, VFX deadlines, even his own sanity, there remained one essential puzzle: the film's music. Ironically, he turned back to James Horner, the very composer he'd clashed with during Aliens. The two had sworn never to work together again, but time has a way of mending fences. After only one meeting, Cameron was convinced Horner was the right man to craft Titanic's score. Horner threw himself into composing what became one of the greatest and most recognizable film scores ever recorded. Its sweeping melodies perfectly underscored the epic tragedy.
I always maintain that the music by itself is less interesting, and the film is less interesting. When they're married together is when the magic sort of happens.
The only hitch was Cameron's insistence on excluding any songs, a point Horner politely ignored. Working in secret with lyricist Will Jennings, he enlisted old friend Celine Dion to record a demo.
I'm listening to this thing. First 2 bars was kind of an eye roll. Oh crap, he's pushing a pop song. And then I started to listen to it, and I really liked the lyrics, and I liked the song. And by the time it finished, I had made my decision. And he said, well, what do you think? I said, this can be as big as I Will Always Love You from The Bodyguard. And he said, well, do you recognize the voice? And I said, no, but I don't really know pop singers. He said, it's Celine Dion. And I said, oh, well, she's kind of big, right?
Now, you'd figure by this point we've plumbed every possible detail behind Titanic. But there's one crucial piece of the puzzle that rarely gets its due: the sound design. Ever hear of Gary Rydstrom and Christopher Boyes? Probably not, though their work on T2 was part of what made that film so unforgettable. Same deal here. They're the reason you feel every crank and groan of the doomed ship in your bones. Their mission was deceptively simple: capture the unique noises of a vessel going under. That means watertight doors sealing shut, the iceberg's tearing impact, and eventually water, a lot of water, swarming every corridor. Still, the standout is arguably the mournful creaking as Titanic breaks apart. For that, they recorded an old ship chained to a pier, capturing the perfect metallic groan as it rocked against the waves. Boyes then took a solid 20-minute slab of field tape and manipulated those eerie echoes into a single signature sound. By the time Titanic finally screened for test audiences, everyone in the editing bay knew one thing: this picture was long.
We knew the movie was, at that time, too long, and I always felt that the goal was to get rid of the TOO in front of long.
But to producer John Landau's relief, the only bits the preview crowd thought dragged were the sinking itself. That told them the romance was clicking just fine, and that, at least, was gold. Shortly after, Cameron took the show on the road, first to the Tokyo International Film Festival, then on November 17, 1997, to Kaliningrad for a special screening aboard the academic Mstislav Keldysh, the same research vessel that helped him dive into the wreck. Standing there in front of the real-life explorers, Cameron still figured this flick might end up a financial iceberg.
We still didn't think we were going to make any money. But at least we knew we had a movie that people liked. So we're starting to breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief. At least we didn't look like complete idiots.
When Titanic opened on December 19th, it squeaked into first place by the slimmest margin, grossing barely 1/10 of its colossal budget. The suits behind the scenes were already tallying up their losses when, lo and behold, the second weekend grossed more than the first. And the third weekend soared even higher.
And everybody just stopped. There was just this strange sense of, what? That doesn't happen. That never happens. And then the next weekend, it went up again. So that's when we realized it was this phenomenon. And then the phenomenon just didn't stop.
Over the next several weeks, Titanic kept hitting new milestones. It clung to the #1 spot for 16 straight weeks. An unheard of streak. By mid-February, nearly 2 months into the release, the film notched its single highest grossing day on Valentine's Day, no less. By that point, teenage girls were watching Titanic on a loop, and the worldwide gross sailed past $1.8 billion, completely overshadowing the old record.
Some say its box office will grow so large, it may actually show profits that no accountant can hide.
Critics couldn't help but swoon either.
If you're going to spend $200 million on a movie, this is the way to do it.
After all the publicity and all the delays and all the reports about its world record budget, turns out to be a glorious Hollywood epic, wonderfully well crafted and well worth the wait.
Film was well received in Hollywood because, frankly, people felt guilty because they had treated us so badly. And this was their way of making it up.
No matter the reason, the accolades rolled in.
Live from Los Angeles, California, the 70th Anniversary Academy Award.
Titanic tied All About Eve with 14 Oscar nominations, walking away with 11 trophies on March 23, 1998.
Deborah L. Scott for Titanic.
Gary Rydstrom, Tom Johnson, Gary Summers, and Mark Ulano for Titanic.
Tom Belfort and Christopher Boyes for Titanic.
Robert Legato, Mark Lasso, Thomas L. Fisher, and Michael Camphor for Titanic.
James Horner, Titanic.
Conrad Buff, James Cameron, and Richard A. Harris for Titanic.
What a shocker. And the Oscar goes to James Horner and Will Jennings for My Heart Will Go On, Titanic.
Peter Lamont for Titanic.
And set decoration, Michael Ford.
Russell Carpenter for Titanic.
The Oscar goes to James Cameron for Titanic.
And the Oscar goes to
Titanic.
This is James Cameron's third Academy Award of the evening, the first for John Landau.
There's no way that I can express to you what I'm feeling right now. My heart is full to bursting, except to say, I'm the king of the world!
Having reached a pinnacle few filmmakers ever see, Cameron then did something unthinkable. He walked away. Instead of immediately leveraging his success on another blockbuster, he pivoted to deep-sea expeditions, an obsession he would nurture for years.
So, of course, as soon as the movie was done, I was immediately planning my next expedition.
Hey, we did our best to create a fun and informative video for you. If you think we succeeded, please hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. It helps us out a lot. Also, we're actively seeking advertisers and sponsors to support what we do. If you're interested, check out our contact information below. And thanks for watching.